There are moments in history that change absolutely everything. The Great Depression, that was one of them. It was a decade of hardship that didn't just break banks, it broke the spirit of a generation and completely reshaped the 20th century. So let's get into it. How did this happen?
I want you to just picture it. The year is 1932. The constant hum of the industrial age, the noise of progress, it's just gone. All across the United States, and really much of the world, factories are locked out. The streets, once filled with people and commerce, are just eerily quiet. It's the sound of economic collapse. And for millions of people, the reality was even more brutal. This wasn't about numbers on a stock ticker anymore. Nope. This was about day-to-day survival. You had people who, just a few years earlier, had good jobs, homes, savings. Now they're standing in line for hours, waiting for a cup of coffee and a donut from a charity. Just something to get them through the day.
Which brings us to the big question, right? How on earth did it come to this? How did the most powerful economies in the world, led by the seemingly unstoppable USA, just completely fall apart? Well, to get the answer, we actually have to rewind to the decade before it all went wrong.
See, to understand the crash, you first have to understand the boom. Before the silence of the Depression, there was the incredible noise of the Roaring '20s, an unbelievable decade of prosperity that was, ironically, built right on the ashes of World War I. Think about it. While Europe was tearing itself apart in the Great War, its economies were at a standstill. So who stepped up to become the world's factory, its farm, its bank? America did. U.S. exports just exploded, more than doubling in just 4 years. The U.S. wasn't just selling things, it was lending money to the Allies, and by the end, it held a huge chunk of the world's gold.
And all that wealth flowing into the country fueled a total revolution back home. For the very first time, regular people could afford incredible new inventions: automobiles, radios, refrigerators, and the secret sauce? Easy credit. Banks were handing out loans left and right, and the installment plan, buy now, pay later, became the American way. It really felt like the dream was within reach for everyone.
But underneath all that excitement, a massive, dangerous bubble was growing. The stock market stopped being about investing. It became a national obsession, a casino. Regular people were putting their life savings, even mortgaging their homes, to gamble on stocks, convinced it was a sure thing. But some insiders saw the writing on the wall. Paul Warburg, a guy at the Fed, warned everyone months before the crash that it was all just a big game rigged by manipulators. But nobody wanted to listen. The party was too good.
And then, in the fall of 1929, the party came to a sudden, violent, and catastrophic end.
And it all happened so incredibly fast. It began with a little tremor on October 22nd. Just 2 days later, on Black Thursday, the bottom just fell out. Panic started to set in. Big bankers tried to step in and stop the bleeding, but it was too late. The confidence was gone. By Black Tuesday, October 29th, it was a complete and utter freefall.
Just to give you a sense of the scale of this thing, on that one Tuesday, $14 billion of wealth just evaporated. That was more than the entire U.S. government budget for the whole year. Fortunes that took lifetimes to build were gone in a matter of hours. But the crash on Wall Street? That was just the first domino to fall. This wasn't just an American problem. The panic was about to go global.
Okay, so let's just trace how this poison worked its way through the system in America. First, the market crashes. That spooks everyone, so people rush to the banks to pull out their cash. But the banks didn't have it. They'd lost it in the market or loaned it out. So over 11,000 banks just failed. And when a bank failed, people's life savings were gone. Forever. With no money, nobody's buying anything. If nobody's buying, factories close. And when factories close, people lose their jobs. See, it's a terrifying downward spiral.
And the damage to the real economy was just staggering. By 1933, things were at rock bottom. A full quarter of the workforce was unemployed. 1 in 4 people couldn't find a job. Industrial production was cut almost in half. The country was basically paralyzed.
And you could literally see the evidence of this crisis everywhere. Families who lost their homes started building these makeshift shacks out of scrap metal and wood. These little shanty towns popped up all over the country, and people bitterly called them Hoovervilles, a direct shot at President Herbert Hoover, who they blamed for their misery. Now, this fire was about to jump the Atlantic. American banks, desperate for any cash they could get, started demanding repayment on their loans to European countries. This set off a brutal chain reaction. In 1931, the biggest bank in Austria collapsed, which started a panic across all of Europe.
In Germany, where things were already unstable, unemployment exploded to 6 million people. This created the perfect storm of anger and desperation for Adolf Hitler to seize power. Even the mighty British Empire was shaken, forced off the gold standard as its people rushed to empty the banks.
So this is a really crucial point. For many people around the world, this looked like the ultimate failure of capitalism, and it created this incredible ideological battle. While the West was falling apart, the communist Soviet Union, which was totally cut off from the global economy, was mostly fine. And you can bet they used the West's collapse as a massive propaganda tool.
Back in America, people were absolutely desperate for a change, any change. And in 1933, they elected Franklin Delano Roosevelt, or FDR, who came in promising a New Deal for the American people.
The New Deal was less of a single plan and more of a massive, frantic burst of government action. They were trying anything and everything. They passed laws to stabilize the banks, to regulate the stock market so the old scams couldn't happen again, and to get industries working again. But the main goal, the #1 priority, was to restore the one thing that had been completely shattered: confidence.
So, did it work? Well, sort of. The New Deal was absolutely crucial. It gave people relief, it put millions back to work, and as you can see, unemployment did fall quite a bit from its peak. But the economy was still incredibly weak. The Great Depression was a long way from being over.
That decade of depression left a permanent mark on the entire planet. It changed the world in fundamental ways that we are still dealing with today.
And here is the dark, inescapable irony of the whole story. What really, truly ended the Great Depression wasn't an economic plan. It was another World War. The massive government spending and industrial production needed for World War II is what finally got all the factories humming again and put everyone back to work.
The legacy of this period is just immense. It permanently changed our idea of what a government should do in a crisis. The economic desperation, as we saw, directly led to the rise of fascism and the start of the war. Out of that war, America emerged as the unquestioned global superpower, and new global institutions were created specifically to try and make sure a collapse like this could never, ever happen again.
And it's so important to remember this wasn't just a Western story. The collapse in global trade was devastating for colonized nations. In a place like India, for example, the price farmers could get for their crops just fell off a cliff, dropping by more than half. They were crushed by debt, with very little help from their colonial rulers. It truly was a disaster that touched every corner of the globe.
So when you step back and look at the whole picture, from the speculative frenzy of the Roaring '20s to the despair of the breadlines and the war that followed, it's a powerful and humbling story. It's a reminder of just how fragile our economic systems can be, and it really forces us to ask an important question. What lessons from that decade of crisis should we be thinking about right now?